She walked into his party uninvited, unannounced, and completely unbothered, and every person in that room knew, the moment she crossed that threshold, that something was about to change forever. But we'll get to that. First, you need to understand the woman standing alone in a penthouse 42 floors above Jeju City, scrolling through photographs of her husband's hands on another woman's waist. Nyla Bryan Kong was not the kind of woman people forgot easily. She was the kind of beautiful that made a room pause, deep brown skin that caught light like polished mahogany, sharp intelligent eyes that saw through everything, a body that moved with the quiet confidence of a woman who had never needed anyone's validation. She was brilliant, warm, composed, and by every measure, extraordinary. And yet, somehow, she had become invisible inside her own marriage. The notifications kept coming. Does his wife even exist? She's staying for the money, obviously. He hasn't been seen with her in months. She set the phone face down on the marble counter, poured herself a glass of water, and stood at the floor-to-ceiling window watching the city lights below. No tears. No rage. Just a stillness that had taken her years to perfect and even longer to regret. Her husband, Lee Jun-hyuk, was the most talked-about man in Jeju City. The kind of man whose name appeared in financial headlines one day and gossip columns the next. At 38, he had built an empire from nothing: real estate, tech, private equity, and he wore his power the way other men wore expensive watches. Casually. Deliberately. So everyone could see it. Tonight, he was hosting what the tabloids were already calling the party of the year. 300 guests. Live music. A rooftop that cost more to light than most people earned in a decade. And somewhere in the middle of it, a glamorous actress named Shin Hana was draped against his arm like she belonged there. Nyla had seen the live stream. She hadn't even flinched. What nobody watching those streams understood, what even Jun-hyuk himself had somehow convinced himself wasn't true, was that none of those women meant anything to him. Not one. He wasn't in love with anyone at those parties. He was in pain. And pain, in men who don't know how to speak it, tends to disguise itself as performance. It had started 3 years into their marriage. Jun-hyuk remembered the exact moment things shifted. They had been at a dinner, quiet, just the two of them, and he had reached across the table for her hand, and she had smiled, but the smile hadn't quite reached her eyes. He hadn't said anything. She hadn't either. But something in the air between them had changed, and no matter what he did, he couldn't seem to find his way back to her. She stopped initiating conversations. She slept turned away. She answered his questions fully, politely, warmly even, but there was a glass wall between them that he couldn't break, and the more he pressed, the more she seemed to retreat behind it. He told himself she had stopped loving him. He told himself she was comfortable, settled, indifferent. He told himself that the woman he had fallen completely apart over in the early years of their relationship had simply grown tired of him. And so he started testing her. The parties. The photos. The women allowed to get just close enough to generate headlines. Every scandal was a question disguised as cruelty. Are you still in there? Do you still care? Will you fight for me? Nyla never did. She watched. She stayed silent. She remained calm. And it destroyed him. What he didn't know, what she had never told him, because she had decided somewhere in her grief that protecting him mattered more than surviving, was that Nyla had suffered 4 miscarriages in the span of 2 years. 4. Each one quiet. Each one carried alone. She had scheduled the appointments herself, recovered in silence, and returned to their life as if nothing had happened, because Jun-hyuk had been in the middle of closing the most important deal of his career, and she had loved him too much to derail that. She hadn't wanted his pity. She hadn't wanted to be a burden. She had wanted, more than anything, for him to simply notice on his own that she was drowning. He never did, and so they had become 2 people living inside a beautiful life, each convinced the other no longer cared, both quietly bleeding out. Until the night Nyla Bryan put on her black dress, stepped into her heels, and decided she was done being quiet. She called no one. She sent no warning. She simply told her driver, "Take me to the Songsan Grand." And somewhere on the 42nd floor, a woman who had held herself together through more pain than most people would ever survive finally decided that falling apart in private was no longer something she was willing to do. The night was about to change for everyone. Don't go anywhere. The moment she walks through those doors will be the moment everything unravels, and you do not want to miss what she says. The Songsan Grand's main ballroom was exactly the kind of spectacle Lee Jun-hyuk was famous for: chandeliers dripping with crystal, champagne towers, a crowd of the most powerful and beautiful people in the country moving through the space like they own the air inside it. Jun-hyuk stood near the center of it all, glass in hand, smile in place, Shin Hana close enough to his side that the photographers hadn't stopped flashing since she arrived. He was laughing at something one of his investors said, nodding at the right moments, performing the version of himself that the world had decided he was: untouchable, unbothered, in control. Then the ballroom doors opened. He didn't look up immediately. Doors opened all night at events like this. But the room changed. It was subtle at first, a ripple of silence moving through the crowd the way a stone disturbs still water. A pause in conversations. Heads turning. Phones slowly rising. And then he felt it. That specific shift in the energy of a room that only happens when someone extraordinary enters it. He looked up. Nyla stood in the doorway. She was wearing a deep black dress that moved like water, her hair back, shoulders open, no jewelry except the ring he had placed on her finger 7 years ago. She wasn't performing. She wasn't making a scene. She wasn't scanning the room with the desperate energy of a jealous wife. She was just standing there, calm, composed, devastatingly beautiful, and looking directly at him. Shin Hana noticed a half-second later. Her hand, which had been resting comfortably in the crook of Jun-hyuk's arm, quietly detached itself. She took a small step sideways and suddenly became very interested in her champagne. The crowd parted. Nyla walked through it the way she walked through everything, like it was simply a thing she had decided to do, and the world had accordingly made room for her. She stopped in front of him. Jun-hyuk stared. For a moment, the mask slipped, just for a moment, and something real crossed his face. Something almost like fear. Then he recovered, tilted his head, let the smirk return. Nyla. His voice was light, teasing, designed for the audience they both knew was watching. I didn't realize you were coming. I know, she said. Nothing else. Just that. He gestured slightly toward the room. You could have called. I would have had them set a place for you. I'm not here to eat, she said. Then what are you here for? She looked at him for a moment that stretched long enough to make the entire room hold its breath. Your driver is waiting downstairs, she said. Let's go home. The silence was absolute. Jun-hyuk blinked. He hadn't expected that. He had expected anger, or tears, or a confrontation he could deflect in front of witnesses. He had expected the kind of emotional outburst he could dismiss later as instability. He had not expected this. This quiet, unshakable certainty. This woman who had walked into the center of his performance and offered him, simply, an exit. He laughed, a short, sharp sound that came out slightly too fast. Go home. He glanced at the people around them. We're in the middle of a party, honey. I'm aware, she said. The word honey, the way he'd said it, lightly, half-mocking, designed to make her feel small in front of all these people, landed in the air between them, and she didn't react. Not a flinch. Not a flicker. I'll ask you one more time, she said, her voice lower now, only for him. Come home with me. He leaned in slightly, the smirk still in place, the performance still running. Or what? She held his gaze for a long, steady moment. Or I leave tonight, she said. And this time, I won't come back. No raised voice. No trembling lip. No dramatic pause designed for effect. She meant it. He saw it in her eyes, and something inside him, something he had been carefully burying for 3 years, cracked straight down the middle. His jaw tightened. The smirk disappeared. The room was still watching. 300 people. Cameras everywhere. The kind of moment that would live on the internet for years. And Lee Jun-hyuk, for the first time in longer than he could remember, was afraid. Not of the cameras. Not of the headlines. He was afraid of her leaving. He handed his glass to the nearest staff member without looking. Straightened his jacket. And for the first time all night, he stopped performing. Let me say goodbye to the investors, he said quietly. You have 5 minutes, she said. She turned and walked back toward the entrance, unhurried, dignified, and every eye in the room followed her. The cameras caught it all. The headlines would write themselves. but none of them would quite capture what had actually happened in that room, which was a woman deciding she had finished being an afterthought, and a man finally realizing what that meant. In the car, they didn't speak. The city moved past the windows in streaks of light. Jun Hyuk stared straight ahead. Nyla sat with her hands folded in her lap, looking out at the dark water beyond the coastal road. When they reached the penthouse, the elevator doors slid open, and the silence between them finally became unbearable. He spoke first. "You embarrassed me in there." She turned to look at him. "Did I?" she said simply. 300 guests. Half of them were clients. "And how many of those nights," she said, her voice still quiet, still steady, "did you embarrass me?" He opened his mouth. He closed it. She walked past him into the living room, set her bag on the counter, and stood at the window, the same window she'd stood at earlier that night, looking at the same city, but something inside her had finally shifted. She turned around and looked at her husband, and the composure that had carried her through years of silence finally, quietly, broke. "I have to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to just listen. No defense. No deflection. Just listen." He stood very still. "I lost 4 pregnancies," she said, "while you were building the Busan deal. While you were in Tokyo for the acquisitions. While you were at every party and every gala and every event that mattered more than coming home." The air left the room. "I didn't tell you," she continued, "because I didn't want to be the thing that held you back. I didn't want you to carry it. So I carried it alone. Every single time." Jun Hyuk's face had gone completely still. "And while I was grieving," she said, "alone, in this apartment, in these rooms, you were testing me. Waiting for me to break. Waiting for me to fight. And I couldn't, Jun Hyuk. I had nothing left." Her voice broke on the last word. "Only slightly. But it was enough. Whatever you do, don't close this video. Because what happens next, what he says, what he does, and what they become, is the part that will stay with you." The silence that followed Nyla's words was not the cold silence of 2 people who had nothing left to say. It was the silence of a man being completely dismantled. Lee Jun-hyuk stood in the center of the room, and for the first time in years, he had no script, no performance, no armor. Just the truth of what she had said, pressing down on him like something physical. 4 pregnancies. 4. And she had never said a word. "Nyla, I'm not finished," she said softly. He went quiet. "Every time I saw those photos you, at another event, another woman next to you, smiling for cameras, I told myself it wasn't real. That you were going through something I didn't understand. That I should be patient." She exhaled slowly. "I kept choosing patience when I should have chosen myself. And I am done choosing patience." He crossed the room in 3 steps and she didn't move away, but she didn't reach for him either. He stopped just in front of her, and when he spoke, his voice was something she hadn't heard from him in years. Something stripped of everything except honesty. "I thought you stopped loving me," he said. "I know how that sounds now. I know how wrong I was. But I watched you go quiet, and I didn't know how to ask why, so he stopped. Pressed his jaw tight. Started again. I was trying to make you feel something. To make you look at me the way you used to. I know that doesn't justify it. I know nothing justifies it. I just need you to understand that there was no one else. There was never anyone else. There was only ever you, and I was too much of a coward to just say that." She looked at him for a long time. "You made me a joke," she said. "To the entire country. I know. You let people say I was weak. That I was pathetic. That I stayed for money. I know, Nyla. You were supposed to protect me." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "I know." She turned back to the window. He didn't reach for her. He had learned, in the last 10 minutes, that there were things in this marriage that couldn't be fixed by a gesture or a declaration. Things that would require something slower and harder and more honest than anything he had given her so far. "I'm not going to ask you to forgive me tonight," he said, from behind her. "I'm not going to promise I'll be perfect, because I've already shown you that I'm not. But I'm asking you not to leave. Not yet. Give me the chance to be what I should have been 3 years ago." She didn't answer immediately. He waited. "You don't get grand gestures," she finally said, turning around. "You don't get to buy me something and call it repaired. You don't get to throw money at this. I know. You come home on time. You answer when I call. You sit with me when I need you there, even when there's nowhere to be and nothing to do. You show up. Completely. Without cameras. Without an audience. Yes. And if you ever, her voice sharpened slightly. If you ever make me invisible again, I will leave, Junhyuk. And I won't look back. You won't have to. It wasn't a fairy tale moment. There was no dramatic embrace. No music swelling. Just two people standing in a quiet apartment above a city that had spent years watching them from the outside, finally telling each other the truth. That was where the real work began. And it was the hardest work either of them had ever done. He canceled the parties. Not dramatically. He didn't make a public statement or perform his reformed character for headlines. He simply stopped going. He started coming home. Sitting across from her at dinner and actually being present rather than half distracted by his phone. He asked her questions he had stopped asking years ago about her work, her thoughts, the things that frightened her, the things that made her laugh. She didn't forgive him quickly. She wasn't built for easy forgiveness, and he had learned, finally, to respect that. There were nights she didn't want him near her, and he honored that. There were conversations that turned into arguments that turned into the kind of raw, messy honesty they had never given each other before, and they sat in those arguments until they reached the other side. He learned things about her he was ashamed he hadn't known. She learned things about him she had stopped trying to understand. They rebuilt slowly. And slowly, it held. 8 months later, they sat in a doctor's office together, something Junhyuk had insisted on, clearing his calendar in a way he had never done for anything that wasn't worth billions. And they heard a heartbeat that made Nyla press both hands over her mouth and made Junhyuk's eyes go glassy in a way he didn't try to hide. They told no one for weeks. They held it together, privately, like something precious they weren't ready to share with a world that had spent years narrating their pain. When the annual Jeju City Charitable Excellence Gala arrived, Junhyuk was asked to speak. He almost declined. Then Nyla told him he should go, and that she would be with him, and something in the way she said with him made him understand this was different now. That she meant it. They arrived together. Not for the cameras, though the cameras came anyway. The room was full of people who had watched their marriage become a tabloid story, who had written their own versions of who these two people were. Junhyuk walked to the podium and looked out at the crowd, and then looked at Nyla, standing near the front, watching him with those sharp, steady eyes that had seen through every version of him he had ever tried to be. He set down his prepared remarks. I built everything I have, he said, by believing that strength meant control. That power meant never needing anything. I was wrong about that for a long time. He paused. The strongest person I have ever known is my wife. She loved me through years when I made that extraordinarily difficult. She stayed when I made leaving easy. She protected me even when I didn't deserve protecting. And she taught me something I should have understood long before now, that being loved is not a right. It is a privilege. And it must be earned. Every day. The room was very quiet. I almost lost that privilege, he said. I am grateful, every single morning, that she gave me the chance to earn it back. Nyla was in tears. He stepped down from the podium and walked to her, and the audience began to applaud, but he wasn't performing for them. He reached into his jacket pocket, and when he opened his hand, she looked down and saw what he was holding. A tiny pair of baby shoes. White. Impossibly small. She covered her mouth. He smiled, the real one, the one that had been absent for so long she had almost forgotten what it looked like, and said, quietly enough that only she could hear, this time, we do it together. All of it. Every hard part, every beautiful part. Together. She didn't say yes because she had to. She said yes because she had spent years hoping the man she married was still somewhere inside the one she had almost left, and standing in this room, holding those shoes, looking at her with nothing hidden in his face for the first time in years, she could see that he was. The room stood. The cameras caught the moment, and by the next morning every outlet in the country was running the same headline. The billionaire who almost lost his wife finally learned her worth. But Nyla didn't read the headlines. She was at home, her husband beside her, his hand over hers. And for the first time in years, the silence between them wasn't a wall. It was rest. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you believe that love, when it's real, is always worth the work, drop a red heart below. New stories every week. Subscribe so you never miss one.